Hi everyone, welcome back to Winging It. My name's Rebecca. If you're new here, you're very welcome, and if you're a regular, welcome back. It's week 49 and it's the first week in December, and that means we're working with a new colour prompt. And as we are heading for the most wonderful time of the year, I thought it would be fun to explore metallics through December. So that's our prompt for today. Now, metallics are quite tricky to work with, both in fabrics and thread, so I am going to give you some tips along the way to make it a little bit easier and a little bit less frustrating. Along with our metallic fabrics and thread, we're going to be exploring our stitches of the month, and if you haven't seen our December stitch guide, I will link it during the video in a card at the top of the screen, so look out for that. I've put a list of everything you're going to need for today's project in the description below, so do check that out. Gather all your bits and pieces and let's get stitching. So the first idea I came up with when I was preparing for a metallic prompt was actually a robot. So I sketched out a little guy and I thought he was fairly cute, but I very quickly realised that there weren't very many opportunities for using our string stitches. So I thought about creating some arms that were a bit sort of chain-like, and maybe some legs and antennae as well. And I wondered whether we could use some string stitches to fill out the space on its body. But it really isn't my style, and I thought it was quite limiting. So the next idea I came up with was based on quite a lot of the images that I'd seen when I was Googling metallics, and I saw lots of metal rods and clusters of wires, and I thought this might make quite a dynamic looking piece if we laid strips of metallic fabrics and then did our string stitches over the top. Thought it might be really effective to create a sort of tangle of wires. But I do know that metallic fabric and thread is really tricky to work with, and I thought this actually, even though it's quite a simple design, would make life very difficult for us. So I parked this idea. My daughter actually gave me the idea of creating some keys, and please excuse the really ropey sketch, my pen was doing all sorts of strange things. But I really like the shape of keys. But once again, I thought this was going to be really difficult to use our string stitches with, and I wondered about perhaps using our stitches to create the teeth of the keys, or we could use them to actually stitch the shape of the key. But I just didn't think it was going to be particularly effective, and I thought we could do better. So the idea I landed on was actually one that I found really inspiring very quickly, and that was the idea of cogs and gears. And I quite liked the idea of using a circular design, but I'd also got in my stash lots of watch parts. I've had these for years and I've never really found a project that would make use of them effectively, and I thought that actually our stitches lent themselves to this sort of design. I thought we could cut out some circles, maybe applique on some circles in metallic fabrics, and then the more I looked at our string stitches, the more I thought they looked a little bit like teeth of cogs, and they've got these sort of knobbly and regularly spaced knots and textures, and particularly my melic stitch has got these sort of triangular shapes, and I thought they would look perfect as the outside of cogs, and I thought we could really have a play with these and have quite a lot of fun. There are lots of them that would work, so I thought we could start with the circle and then use our string stitches to partly to anchor down the fabric, but also to add that textural edge to the gears. And then we could use these little watch parts, these extra little cogs, to fill in the gaps and just create more of a sense of gear wheels and things like that, mechanical arrangement. So this is the idea that I decided to go with. I'm going to be working on this dark purple felt. I don't know if you can pick up the purple there. I promise it is. It looks very sort of navy blue or black on screen. And I've gone ahead and already cut out some circles out of this. I don't really know what this fabric is. It looks like something off an Elizabethan costume. I think I got it in a scraps pack from eBay or Etsy, but I thought it would look really good. I quite like the contrast of it. It's almost like a cross between silver and gold. So I've gone ahead and cut out some different size circles, and I just want to create an arrangement on the felt that will fit and that looks like the wheels are connecting in some way. So I've got those in place, and just to give you an idea, I think these are going to look really nice in the small gaps there. I've also gathered some metallic threads. I've got some sparkly wool here. This is just a wool that's got a metallic thread woven into it, so it's got a bit of glitter. I've got some DMC gold thread, and I've got some machine thread that is gold as well. And then those of you who have been around since the very beginning will be familiar with my love-hate relationship with machine silk. So this is a synthetic silk, but it looks and behaves a lot like a silk thread, and it is quite tricky to work with. It has a mind of its own. It's very slippery, very difficult to keep in a needle, but I do really like the look of it and the effect it creates on a design. So I've got that as well to keep me going. So I'm just going to put all those cogs to one side, and I thought we could start by attaching the circles to the background felt. Before I do that, I just want to deal with the fraying issue, because this fabric frays really, really badly. Most metallic fabrics do, and I want to control that a little bit. So I've just got a tea light here, and we use this technique back when we did fabric manipulation. I'm just going to hold the fabric close to the flame just so that the edge of it melts a little bit, and you've just got to be careful not to set fire to it too much. It does sometimes catch, but it's not a big deal. You can just blow it out a little bit, and I just want to singe those edges so that they're sort of melted together, and this is going to control the fraying a little bit. So it does, because it's going to cause the fabric to curl, it's going to distort the circles a little bit, but we're going to stitch around the edge anyway, so we can sort of reshape them when it comes to it. So it's just about getting the balance between getting your fabric close enough to the flame that it singes, but not so close that you melt huge chunks of your circle away. So just be careful. It would probably be safer to do this using tweezers, but I don't have any. So I'm just going to work around the edges of all of those circles, and now I'm ready to stitch them down. I'm just going to take them all off for a moment. You can see there's loads of fibres on there, so I'm just going to brush those away so that I'm not sewing them in. I thought we could just use this machine thread to just stitch them down. So I'm just going to thread up a needle with that. There's lots of ways of doing this. You could try bond web with this, though it would certainly help stop the fabric fraying, but you can see that the fabric is really textured, and so I'm not confident that bond web is going to do a particularly good job sticking these shapes down. I want to leave enough space for my string stitches around the outside. I'm just going to go around this with a running stitch, and because the thread that I'm sewing with is so fine, you can barely see it actually on the surface of the fabric. So you could pin these in place, but a lot of metallic fabrics don't like pins because once you've punctured them, that hole is there forever. So I think this is going to work best for me. So I'm just going to stitch all of my circles down in the same way, just with a simple running stitch just inside the outside edge of the shape. Don't want to go too close to the edge because I don't want to cause any fraying that's not necessary. So just working around that quite carefully. So that's what it's going to look like. You can see that there's space between the shapes for the stitching that I'm going to put on. So now I've got all my gold circles in place, I can start thinking about my decorative stitches. You can also see there that I've drawn around each of the circles with my heat erase pen just to give me a clear line to follow with my stitching. I'm going to take the plunge. I have to be honest, this fills me with dread because I am not somebody that enjoys working with metallic thread, but I'm doing this in response to a specific request for some tips on using metallic thread, so I hope this helps. So you can see already that it behaves very differently to embroidery thread. It's got many more fibres in it and they come apart very easily. And the first tip that I can give you for working with metallic thread is to use a much shorter length than you would normally use. So I've got about maybe 25 centimetres there, 30 centimetres, and I really wouldn't recommend going any longer than that because there is going to be quite a lot of friction on this thread. It creates a lot of wear as you're pulling it through your fabric, and so what you want is just a short length that you can stitch well and then start a new one. And it really is worth doing that rather than persevering with a really long length of thread. So I've separated out roughly half of the filaments and I'm just going to remove each strand just like I would normally. So I'm holding the thread loosely in my left hand and pulling out single strands at a time, and we'll be able to twist those back together and use them again. So I'm just going to put them to one side, and I can already feel how much friction there is as I'm pulling out these strands. It's not cotton, it is metallic, so there is quite a lot of resistance as I'm pulling those threads out. I'm just going to gather up all those filaments and put them to one side. We'll use those again later. So now I've got my length of thread, and what we want to do is try and stick these filaments back together, and the best way to do that is with beeswax. We used beeswax back when we were doing buttons. It's quite sticky, and so it's going to work really well to hold those strands together, and it's a really useful tool to have. You can see already the effect it's having. It makes the thread much more rigid, almost like wire, and although that sounds like it's doing something that you don't want it to do, it sounds like it would make it quite hard to work with. But actually it makes it much easier to work with. You have far fewer flyaways and it protects the thread as you're pulling it through the fabric. So I've just threaded it up into a needle, and I would recommend that you use quite a chunky needle. What you want is for the needle to make the hole in the fabric that is big enough for the thread to pass through without too much drag. So I'm using a sizable needle, and I would normally use a quilter's knot, but I'm not going to do that with metallic thread because it involves pulling the whole length of the thread through your loop to make a knot. So I'm just going to tie a knot in the end there, and that will work just fine. and then there's no wear on the rest of the thread. So I'm just going to start with this small one just to get my eye in, and I think we'll start with a double knot stitch. So I've got my thread coming through, and these are all the stitches I'm going to use are in our December stitch guide, and I'll link that at the top of the screen so that if you're not sure about these stitches, you can go and learn them and find out how to do them. So I'm going to start by bringing my thread through to the front, and I've gone along a little way and I'm just pulling. I've made a little vertical stitch across the line there. Then I'm going to loop my thread back and slide my needle underneath that horizontal stitch that I've just made and pull through, and then I'm going to go through again. I've created a little V at the end there, and I want my needle to just go in between the prongs of the V. Now this isn't thread, it's metal, so we have to work it quite hard. You have to manipulate it to make sure that your knots are sitting flat. So you can see I've taken my needle through that loop I created there, and I'm just working that knot so that it's tight. So let me demonstrate that again and explain it a bit better. So I'm taking my needle vertically across the line to make a little downward stitch, and it pulls my working thread into a horizontal. I'm looping round and taking my needle underneath that horizontal, and that's created a little fork there at the end, a little V. So I loop my thread round again and take my needle through, coming out in between the prongs of the V, and pull through. And I just want to work that thread so that the knot sits nice and tight. So again, a little vertical stitch across the line, and we just keep looping round, making sure that we're working our stitches nice and tight. And when we get back to the beginning, we just want to add in that missing horizontal line. So I'm just going to do a straight stitch from my last knot to the first one on the line, and that's double knot stitch, and I actually think that's worked really nicely. If I bring it up close, you can see the knots there sitting around the outside, making it look a little bit like the teeth on a cog. So I think that's created exactly the effect that I was hoping for. I'm quite pleased with that. Those stitches have not just outlined the circle and given it texture, but they've also held down that fabric and secured it a little bit more. So you can see that length of thread got all the way around that small circle, but we're not going to be able to stitch much more than that distance. So it really is, you have to take my word for it, it really is worth restarting a thread rather than trying to use a whole length of thread to get all the way around a larger circle. What I'm doing here is just gathering together all those filaments that I took out to thin thread, and I'm lining up the ends again. Now if you don't have thread like this, but you do have some metallic sewing thread, you can always just cut lengths of that, and the beeswax will help them stick together and be more like a thread. So I'm just going to twist them together a little bit just to get us started, and then take my threads through the beeswax. And you can see one's pulled itself out there, so already misbehaving. But you can see there, when I take it through the beeswax, you can see it's almost rigid. It works really well to make this thread less horrific to work with. So there are ways of making it more bearable. So I know I'm not selling this very well. I do find metallic thread very frustrating to work with, but yeah. So another good thing about the stitches that we're doing is that they do create quite a lot of twist in the thread as well, and normally you don't want that, because with cotton threads that just causes loads of noose knots. But actually with this metallic thread, when you start cutting lengths of it, it tends to untwist itself and all the filaments come apart. So the stitches that we're using will actually help keep the twist in the thread and keep it as one thread rather than lots of different strands. So I'm going to use Danish knot here, and in the tutorial video we stitched a long string first and then knotted across it, but I think that's going to be quite difficult to manage on a circle, so I'm going to make lots of individual Danish knots. So I've started by doing a straight stitch that's maybe 1/2 centimetre, something like that, and I'm bringing my thread up in the centre of it to form a sort of T shape. And we're going to make our knot so that, just trying to decide there which way round to have the knot. I'm going to make it so the point of the knot is coming in towards the circle. So I'm looping my thread round and taking it under that straight stitch on the left hand side of the vertical of the T. And then I'm going to go round again and take it underneath the horizontal stitch again, but this time on the right of where the thread came up in the middle of it. And I want to make sure that my needle is going over the top of that working thread. So again, I'm pulling the thread round and through. This is the one that makes knots that look like little love hearts. So I'm just tightening the knot a little bit there. And then when I'm happy with my knot, I'm going to take my thread back through the felt to the back, and that just anchors the knot in place. And now I can bring my needle up at the end of that first straight stitch that I made and make it another straight stitch. I want to try and keep these very similar lengths. Then bring my needle up halfway along the stitch to make that T shape, loop my needle over the top and go under the straight stitch to the left of that vertical of the T, and then round again and under to the right of that vertical of the T, and pull the thread through, tighten up the knot, and then take my needle back through the felt to anchor the knot in place. And then we just do that all the way around. So I'm going to add lots of different stitches around the outsides of these knots. You can play around as much as you like with our stitches of the month and create different effects. So here's all my stitching in place. So I think I've got Palestrina stitch here, and that one is Portuguese knotted stem stitch, and then we've got coral stitch, I believe that one is, and the largest wheel there is Mount Melick stitch. I really like that one because it's got sort of triangular motifs, and I've just stitched around the edge of each of them to create that cog effect. I'm already not sure this is turning out quite as I'd hoped or expected, but we'll persevere, see how it goes. So now I'm going to just anchor down these little cogs and watch parts, and I'm going to treat them just like sequins. If you don't have watch parts, which I could totally understand that you don't have a bunch of old watch parts in your stash, but if you don't, you could just use sequins or beads, and you're going to see me threading my needle a lot because this thread's so slippery. So I'm just coming up in the middle there and putting some straight stitches over the edge like I would if it was a sequin. So you could use sequins, you could use beads, you could wrap some rubber washers, or if you've got metal rings left over from your buttons the other week, you could use that. So I'm just going to add on some of these embellishments. Got all sorts going on here. That's a more sort of cone shaped cog, and I've got some really nice open cogs as well that add something very different. So I'll just put these in any little gaps. Now I wanted to put something in the centre of these cogs, but I have tried all sorts of things. I've tried rubber washers in the middle, I tried buttons, I tried some beads, and nothing worked. Nothing looked as good as it looks without them. And so I decided to leave them as they were. I did in the end, you'll see from the thumbnail and you'll see from my post on Instagram, I did in the end find a solution, put some sequins and beads in the centre there. I don't know whether this is going to go down as one of my favourite pieces in the Winging It series. I'm not sure it works as I wanted it to as cogs and gears, but I think it does work as an abstract metallic piece, and I don't dislike it. It's just not what I was hoping it would look like. So that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Really looking forward to seeing what you create with metallics prompt. Do share your pieces at #FSHWingingIt, and so that we can see all of these together, you could also add #FSHWingingIt49. If you have enjoyed this and want to do another applique piece, I'll link a video here, and I'll put a video up here that's best for you. If you want to subscribe, just click on our logo there and it makes it really easy for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.